stopped by without telling anyone what he did and quietly returned to the front. Raptors put the glass of wine down and were amazed to know that because that wasn't what Idril had said and inquired if he was sure that had happened. He assured him there was nothing like that as far as he knew, but was furious at Idril as she was so sneaky. Benizia has 3 royal princes. On the outside, people think the 3 of them have a strong brotherly bond, but there is a huge amount of tension building up between them. However, in this invincible struggle, Raptors had an overwhelming advantage over his brothers because he was the first in the line to inherit the royal throne, and his confidants were the powerful Idril and Mark. He even has all the kingdom's enormous resources at his disposal, but his 2 brothers, on the other hand, were more like subordinates than competitors. But the 2 of them were proud to submit to him without a fight. As a result, they each decided to deal with the first prince in their way. Gerald openly ignored Raptors, which naturally irritated him because he was the firstborn son. Despite being so young, being the 3rd son with the lowest chances of inheriting the throne, Gerald was practically forced to fight on the notoriously dangerous northern frontier. However, Alfred is a different story because he is smart, so he pretends to help Raptors while ensuring his safety. He oversees all the kingdom's finances and is an advisor to his older brother, the future king. Thus, he sharpens his skills and secures a position for himself in the process, even though he has absolutely no intentions of serving Raptors. Just out of curiosity, Raptors inquired if he was not going around and doing stuff behind his back, but the second prince laughed and refused. Although Alfred and Gerald compete with one another, they both share the common desire to succeed to the royal throne. So their top priority is to get rid of Raptors first, so there was no reason for them not to team up. Alfred stands to leave as he feels like he has taken too much of the first prince's time. Before leaving, he utters that he will open a bottle of wine next time. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Benizia's northwest wood, Eliana wondered if those were all the medicinal herbs she was smelling. Bernard said they would be coming up to Kildent soon, where they should be able to find the medicine they were looking for. The protagonist only recently learned about the sudden increase in trade for herbs and medicine, so he wondered how he knew about that. Eliana assured them she was truly fine, but Memento remarked that she was talking nonsense, as he could tell from her mana flow that she was not okay. Since she continuously insists that she is all right and doesn't need any medicine, the protagonist urges her to try making a bow. She lifted the artifact and tried creating the bow through it, but failed, clearly showing her mana's depletion and abnormal flow. The protagonist was sure that if she kept pushing herself like this, she might be unable to use magic. He suggested that she should get some rest because he wouldn't have any more excuses until she fully recovered. He inquired Bernard if he was aware of how much further it was, and he was sure that they would see it any minute now and soon saw Kildent. It was a tough journey, but he was amazed to know that this was where he wanted to bring them, and he thanked him and his boss for his help. He doesn't want him to mention it, considering all the help he has given them. They should be thanking him. The protagonist thinks that maybe he would tell them his name if he ever ran into them again. Finally, they reach the city and ask them to help him if they needed anything else because his boss told him to make sure they were all set before he left. The protagonist looks at Eliana, who lost consciousness and fell, which worries Stetch, and he rushes to her and wonders if she is sick to that extent. Memento was also wondering how she managed to tolerate that abnormal mana flow and guessed that she might be putting on a brave face. He realized that he might be pretending not to be sick, and they didn't even notice that, and he remarked that both of them weren't exactly the sharpest tools in the shed. The protagonist rushed out of the carriage, instructing Bernard to stop the carriage and wait there as he would go and get some medicine or herbs for her. He knew that taking medicine alone wouldn't be enough to restore her normal mana flow. But there should be some medicine there to help him recover, which was why they were there. He rushed inside one shop and informed the shopkeeper that he needed a mana recovery tonic immediately. But the shopkeeper didn't have any mana recovery medicine, which shocked him, and he furiously inquired what he meant. Kildent was known for its rare medicinal herbs, so he wondered how he could not have any of the mana recovery tonics. The shopkeeper tried to calm him down and clarified that it was true as they sell all the basic medicine, but no one in town sold mana recovery tonic at the moment. He couldn't believe this. Suddenly, an old lady appeared and informed him that this was a peaceful town, so he shouldn't go around shouting like that. She understands that he might be surprised that a town known for its medicinal herbs has no recover tonic, but what the shopkeeper was telling him was right. She explained that the Dunlight flower, which is the main ingredient in recovery tonics, only grows at the top of the Rocky Mountain, but no one can get there now. For the last few months, everyone who has gone to the flower garden has come back without any recollection of the place at all. The protagonist inquired that if he brought back some of these flowers, they could make the medicine for him. The man affirmed that he could make it, but he wondered how he planned to do that, as it was easier said than done. The old lady doesn't recommend him going there because it wouldn't do him any good, but without listening to their suggestion, he decides to leave and requests them to wait for him, as he will soon be back. Later, he reached the mountain and wondered who had been going around erasing people's memories. He inquired Memento if he had any idea. Memento uttered that if no one remembers, then how should he be known about this? He looked around, as there were surely a lot of rare plants in the woods around Kyldent. He knew that this place would be a dream come true for people who study medicinal herbs, but at the same time, there was something that was bothering him. He was alerted as he sensed something suspicious and grabbed his sword to be prepared for any attack. The protagonist felt that the thing behind him might be quick, but it sounded big, and soon it attacked him, which he managed to dodge. He found it strange, as the townspeople never said anything about this, and he wasn't expecting to run into a Grossach in there. He wondered how it could be there. The monster roared and tried to attack him, but he rushed away and lifted his arm to strike it using an air burst, which caused a massive explosion in the forest. Later, he used Cure's eating on it to absorb its mana, and Memento was also shocked, as it was unusual to face Grossach in there. The protagonist knew this because they usually lived in colonies of 200 or 300 spiders, so he wondered where the rest were. They were looking for some Dunlight, but if they don't do something about those monsters, it's only a matter of time until they destroy the town. He was surprised because no one had even noticed their presence before, and was startled as he got attacked by an arrow, which he managed to stop by grasping it using his automatic reflexes. The protagonist asks the man who targeted him to answer him before he could blow him to small pieces of who he is. He clenched his teeth and wondered how he caught an arrow with his bare hand, and figured out that he might be a dangerous person. The protagonist wants his answer, and using the flicker of his finger, he attacks him with his air bullet, which makes him fall from the tree branch. The protagonist went to him and put his sword on his head, and the man inquired how he dared to look at him like that. Stetch started to know that the man who attacked him was an elf who couldn't believe that a mere human like him had beaten him. The protagonist hasn't seen that in ages, the way their pupils turn white when they are on their guard, especially because they hate humans like him so much. The protagonist retrieves his sword, shields it, and instructs him to stand up as he pretends that he didn't just try to kill him, but he wants to know what is going on in this forest. The elf doesn't want to tell him anything, so the protagonist decides to tell him the truth that his only elf friend is really sick currently, so he needs to get to the top of his mountain to find ingredients for some medicine. But the townspeople say everyone who climbs the mountain loses their memories. He wanted to know who the mastermind behind all this propaganda was, but the elf stared at him and rushed away. Memento wondered who he was standing there, as he could freeze his legs if he wanted to stop him. The protagonist sighed because he didn't want to go around scaring everyone before he knew what was going on around there, so he couldn't deny that those elves were certainly quick. Meanwhile, at the elf's residence, the elf, who got defeated by the human and rushed away to the incident to his fellow elves, who couldn't believe this, inquired what he had done just now. The elf uttered that he saw a human in the woods while he was on patrol, and his leader thought that he might have shot at him without even telling her first. He didn't even have a choice, and was sure that she would understand it if she were that human for herself. He crushed a Grossachin by himself with just a sword and some magic, and inquired what she thought someone like him might be doing there in the forest. She understood the situation and asked if he had killed her, but he was reluctant to tell her the truth, as there was a kind of problem with that. Hearing this made her furious, and she slapped him forcefully because it wouldn't be as bad if he would kill him at least, but he let him get away. She wondered if he was trying to ruin her months of hard work. Other elves were also worried, as this wasn't a good situation for them. She inquired why he thought she had been erasing the humans' memories and sending them away like this the whole time. She wondered what they would do if that human would show up there, and then the protagonist appeared and inquired what they would do then. All of them were staring at him, shocked, while he requested them to keep going because he was dying to know why they had been erasing people's memories. After seeing them staring at him with shock, he wondered what the matter was. The elf leader gets furious, and using her active skill, the wind cutter, which creates a sharp sword of wind with the blade of the person's hand, she rushes at him to attack. Her immediate and swift charge on him irritated him, and he remarked that these elves were surely feisty. The protagonist grabbed her hand, so she instructed her fellows to shoot him. All of the elves shot the arrows at him, but he diverted those arrows using the crosswind. Everyone was shocked to see this and was surprised, wondering how he could evade all the arrows without moving. The protagonist uttered that they would never eat him even if they tried hard, so he wanted them to listen up. He pointed at the elf behind. They could tell from the fact that he was still standing back that he was not there to hurt them. He was going to leave them in peace if they just answered his questions about why they were complicating things like this. The elf leader informed Dihim that the elf behind him didn't speak human language, so how could he possibly answer him when he didn't even understand what he was saying? He released her hand, and Memento remarked that he might as well have been talking to a wall, which made him pissed off as he wasted his time. She asked if he meant by this that he was not an assassin sent by the humans to kill them. He clarified that if he wanted to kill them, then this whole building would already be in ruins. Since he had her attention, and no one seemed to understand what he had said before, so he wanted to start it over. She understands the situation, although she finds it hard to believe that a human would befriend an elf. The protagonist wondered if she meant that he was lying, and was amazed as the elf surely has trust issues. She asked the name of his elf friend that he was talking about, and he uttered Eliana Drainoir, which shocked all of them. All of the elves behind him were murmuring about how he knew that name, and he turned and looked at him surprisingly as they all knew her. The elf leader wanted to get it straight, so he asked if his sick friend was Eliana, and inquired what happened to her and if she had caught something. The protagonist uttered that she just pushed herself too hard, and he knew that he could tell them it was because of him. He inquired if she would answer his question now that she knew about all this, and if they were really the ones erasing people's memories, then why are they doing this? The elf leader doesn't want him to get it wrong because they never attack anyone unless they are threatened, and they are just defending themselves against intruders at first. She knew that she had to eat some sense into that knucklehead later and explained to the protagonist that they didn't have any bad intentions. They didn't want to let humans near the mountains because some monsters had settled in a cave there. The protagonist realized that the rest of those monsters would be in the cave, and if that was true, then the elves actually saved the townspeople. He believed them for now, but was in a bit of a hurry, so he had to leave. She was shocked and inquired if he meant he was going to attack the monsters and wondered if he was out of his mind. He looked at her, smiled, and asked if her scout hadn't told her that those little spiders were no match for him. After saying that, he jumped out and rushed toward the cave. After he left, there was complete silence, and she thought it might be an opportunity for them. Her comrade wondered what she meant as they couldn't let even a single human get to that cave. Otherwise, it could ruin their whole plan. Myriad thought about it and was sure that they couldn't even keep the monsters away forever, so she decided to go with him. She knew that if they didn't breathe gross actions now, it was only a matter of time before their people and all of them would be killed. She grabbed Sid's collar, dragging him along with her, but he could understand what he was doing with her, and she instructed the rest of them to keep an eye on things there as they would be back later. Meanwhile, deep inside the forest, the protagonist was concerned as he should have seen some spider by then and wondered if the one he just fought was a straggler. Suddenly, a monster lunged at him from above, but he pierced its head with his sword, and using the air to burst, he complexly destroyed his body, which crumbled into tiny pieces. After that, another spider appeared before him, and he was amazed to see two spiders simultaneously because these spiders hardly ever leave the rest of the group, so he wondered what they were doing by themselves. The spider threw the acid at him, which he recognized as the same thing he had done when he fought the mineral lizard initially. He jumped and evaded its attack and rushed toward his head, but he was startled as he saw a shining thing and wondered what that was. He was getting attacked by the spider, but was protected by the arrow, which was thrown by one of the elves. He was shocked as there were more elves there, so he retrieved his sword from the shield, pointing at them, but she surrendered. He was shocked to see two of them again and inquired what they were doing there. Myriad uttered that they came to help him, but he refused as he didn't need their help. Using the swirl skill, he attacked the spider behind and requested the levs to stay out of his sight as they would only get in his way. She was astonished by his terrifying skill as he had just destroyed the monster with a single spell. The protagonist clarified that Eliana's was a different story, but he just met them, so he didn't have time to teach them everything from scratch, so he wanted them to return home. Myriad agreed and guessed it was rare to find such a quick learner like Eliana with her combat support. She could see why he might feel that way if he was used to working with her, but informed him that Grossachens had left the nest in the flower garden, so if he's trying to reach the top of the mountain, he should be careful, and she admitted that he is powerful. But not even he could fight a whole nest of Grossachens without damaging the dunlight flowers in the garden. The protagonist was using the curse of eating to absorb those monsters' mana and inquired how she planned to help him. She promised to make sure he would be free to fight the Grossachens and they would get the dunlight flowers for him while he was fighting. Both of them were shocked to witness him absorbing the monster, and he agreed to this condition as that would be all right. His mana increased as a result of curse eating, and she was a bit surprised as he had never met a human like him who sent hostile toward them, and this was her first time. She wondered if that was why Eliana traveled with him and wondered how the two of them met. The protagonist was amazed as she really had many questions, but it's a long story, and if she wanted to know, she could ask Elena herself when she was all better. He wondered what about her and why she was helping him, and inquired if she was helping him because of Eliana. But that wasn't the only reason, as she had been living secretly in these woods since before the human town appeared. But when all these Grossachens invaded the forest, their life began to fall apart. Every one of them was so powerful, and they far outnumbered elves like them, which was why they decided to starve them, taking advantage of the fact that Gorsachen didn't usually leave their territory. They started protecting the townspeople from the spiders and even erased their memories. They sounded like they were more cautious, and he assumed that the spiders he ran into were on the prowl because they were hungry. It wasn't a very good plan, but it was the best thing they could do given the circumstances. Then, right as they were starting to get anxious about what those monsters might do when they got really hungry, Stetch appeared. He was their only hope for escaping from this situation. Later, they went inside the dungeon, and he started subjugating the monsters. Myriad was getting rid of all those webs that were obstructing their way. The protagonist was frustrated as the whole place was full of spiderwebs, and he fell while clearing them. Suddenly, he got attacked by the spider monster behind him, and she alerted him to be cautious and shoot the rock spike, which attack enemies with a rock structure. The protagonist was amazed and inquired if she was a sorceress. She uttered that it uses up much mana, so she tried to save it for emergencies, but this was not of much use in a long battle. He glanced at her and could see what she meant by this. It could have been more effective against these many enemies. She was worried and tried to evade the attack, but the monster got electrocuted, which stopped their attack. The protagonist rushed to those monsters and, using an air burst, attacked them and splattered them into many pieces. The protagonist was amazed as he could use green electricity, and Sid wondered if he would get in his way. The protagonist remarked that her rather was surprisingly useful as he seemed to have talent, but he felt bad as he was such a softie, and she was glad to hear that. The protagonist was contented to know that they both seemed pretty experienced in battle, so they could start moving things along a bit more quickly. He clarified that they would be responsible for protecting themselves and used fireballs, which led to a massive explosion that threw them away. Myriad was furious at him as he almost killed them, and Sid was dumbfounded as he was so powerful. The protagonist already told them that he couldn't afford to waste time. Besides, these two weren't that weak as they seemed strong enough, so he was sure they wouldn't die so easily. They reached the top of the mountain and inquired if that was the right place because he thought there was supposed to be a flower garden on the top, but all he could see were spiderwebs. One of the monsters appeared, and she sighed as they were all hiding there and surrounded by all of them. Sid gets frightened by the enormous number and suggests to Myriad that they should turn back, but she gets furious at him and warns him to attack him first if he spouts such nonsense again. The protagonist grinned excitedly as that whole place was really crawling with those spider monsters. The protagonist instructed the two of them to stop talking and look over there as he found some flowers and inquired if those were Dunlight flowers. She affirmed that those were the flowers that he was searching for, but they were kind of hard to reach. The protagonist instructed them to worry about the flowers as he would handle the rest of those monsters. The protagonist uses the curse aura and cursed cloak, which surrounds his body with an aura of dark energy. Memento also suggested using it as he hasn't tried it since the last time, and it costs less and is easier to use now. Memento evolved the ability and optimized it for him. Stetch wondered if this was because of that black artifact too, but he wasn't complaining about it and jumped to attack. Myriad was amazed at how he could use so much dark energy surrounding him. He was in the air, and he spread his cloak and wondered if that is how he used this thing. He spread it around all those monsters enclosing them and jumped down. All of those monsters started trembling, and he smirked as if this would show them his true strength and cursed them. The protagonist instructed them to attack those spider monsters as this was their perfect chance. Myriad instructed her brother Sid to attack them, but he was reluctant to shoot and wanted to blame him if anything bad happened to them. Some other gross action came out of the cave, and they figured out that it must be this colony Queen Mother and Alpha, who was hardly even affected by the attack. The Queen Spider attacked them, but before it could succeed, Sid attacked it using the Shock Bolt skill, which fires an electrically charged projectile. Myriad rushed away from the monster using her electric whip, which tied up enemies, and she tied it with the mud cave climb up. Sid was pleased to see her move and didn't want the monster to look back, so he aimed the arrow toward the beast. This made the queen furious, so her fur straightened up, and she threw them toward him, which shocked Sid as she could shoot the fur off its body. Unable to get a grasp of the situation and unable to evade this sudden, unpredictable attack, he covered his face and knelt, but Stetch appeared before him, and using his technique's crosswind, he diverted all these furs. The queen spider charged against him and jumped to attack Stetch, but Myriad, who was above the cave, jumped at it, and using the rock spike, she shot it. She rushed toward the Dunlight flower to get these so that they could head back to the woods before the monster came after them. The protagonist refused as he was beating this monster right now, so he instructed them to stay out of the way. He attacked the monster with a combination of airburst and fireball, which created a blazing storm, getting rid of most of those monsters in a single go. Myriad was shocked as this couldn't be and wondered how a human could use such powerful magic and was curious about him. They were rushing away and Myriad turned and could feel the heat from the ground even from that distance, and she couldn't even understand what was going on. Even after such a tremendous blazing storm, the queen spider did not even have a scratch. The protagonist was dumbfounded as it didn't even have any burn marks on its body. Memento thought something was wrong because only a dungeon keeper could withstand an attack like this. He used curse eating on the remnants of all the other monsters and remarked that this attack might be a bit too powerful as he almost burned himself too. But that doesn't matter to Memento as the biggest problem was that his spell didn't work on him, and he was annoyed to think that it didn't kill that queen spider. His self-centered conversation upset Stetch as he couldn't believe that was what he was worried about, although he almost got killed in this process. He puts his hand in his bag and mumbles that they had a bit of surprise while fighting the monster, so he doesn't want to think about it too much. He took out the cylinder and smirked because if his that didn't work on that monster, then he would have to go with brute force. Memento recognized that salamander dust cylinder that he got some time ago, but he thought that kind of thing only worked against those big fat bunyips. Because the spider managed to block his blazing store attack, he thought it wouldn't work for him. The protagonist assured him as he checked the shells, and the one that he had used before was just knockoff salamander dust, so he reckoned it might be worth testing out before using the real thing. Memento remarked that those dwarves could never make anything right, but Stetch didn't listen to him. He rushed toward the monster to attack him and to test it and requested his partner to stop whining now. The queen spider threw the acid at him, which he evaded using his crosswing and charged at the monster. But before his sword could pierce its body, the beast grabbed it with his mouth, which startled him. This concerned him as he knew that he would never get past its thick hide and kill it in one shot, so he used an air bullet to get out of its grasp. Memento inquired if he needed something strong enough to take it open, which made him wonder if he had any idea. Memento suggested that he should use the ice attack against it, so he wanted him to get ready immediately. He was shocked as this was quite random and wondered why he would suggest using ice, but he used Ice Wave, and on his artifact instruction he used its combination with an air bullet. This combination forms icicle bullets, which fire numerous large and small ice shards that have the normal chance of causing bleeding. This technique amazed him, and at Memento's command he shoots them at the spider, which pierces its body at several points. This was the most awaited chance for him, so he rushed at it and pressed the counter button on his sword. Such tremendous energy appeared from it, which shocked him. He praised the alchemist as his skills were entirely to another level, and wasn't sure if he should be giving out something so dangerous. However, he was the one who asked for it. Memento pointed toward the monster's belly, which stunned Stetch. After seeing the material that came out of its belly, they did not doubt that it was so powerful for an ordinary monster, as he had an artifact inside it. Memento was unable to detect the artifact behind all the dark energy. He grabbed the artifact and wondered if it would devour an explorer who had an artifact. Later, at the house, he gave Ileana a medicine to drink and explained that it's a magic tonic made of plemons, deer antlers, ginseng, and dun light flower, so she should drink it all. But she was reluctant as she didn't like its smell, but she drank it in a single attempt and sighed peacefully. After seeing her finish her tonic, he instructed her to have some rest as it would take time for him to recover so that he would meet her later completely. After he came out of the room, Barnard inquired about her health and if she was all right, and he affirmed. The protagonist expressed his gratitude for taking care of him in his stead while he was away and asked if there was something wrong. Barnard informed him that he had a couple of visitors, and he wondered who those visitors could be. Myriad was embarrassed to visit him unannounced, but Sid was amazed to see the human civilization. The protagonist can't believe they visit him and wonders what the two of them are thinking as they walk right into a human town like this. Although he knows he has a magical face painting, but it is still too risky for them to walk that freely. He took them to the room where Ileana was resting, and she was amazed to look at her as she was really an honest human who never lied. This annoyed him, and he wondered if she meant she didn't believe him this whole time. But that wasn't the case, and she was confused as people never know until they see something by themselves. He wondered how she knew Elena, and she uttered that she was like her sister, although they weren't actually related. She explained that the elves from Kildent and the elves living in the Forest of Darkness have been in contact for a long time. As the daughter of the chef, Ileana was particularly friendly, so she has always been very popular among their tribe as well. But at some point, a dungeon appeared in the Forest of Darkness, which gradually became more powerful until they could no longer contain it themselves. Then Leona lost her father, and the situation reached an all-time low. After that, they lost contact with them and Ileana. The protagonist wondered if she was talking about Cain. Although he had saved him ages ago, he thought he should just let Ileana tell her about this. While they were conversing, Ileana woke up and was amazed at Myriad, and they hugged each other tightly as they met after a long time. The protagonist looked at them, chuckled, and took Sid out of the room to give them some space to talk comfortably. Ileana mumbled that when she heard that a human town appeared around there, she assumed they might have already left the forest, and she didn't hear anything from her, so she was concerned. Myriad explained that relocating too suddenly would have drawn the humans' attention to them. So they created an environment where herbs could grow around the human settlement, and they did their best to keep the humans out of the forest. Since she had asked enough about her, Myriad wanted to know about her and who she ended up working with as a human. She was shocked to know that he had even saved Cain and praised him as he was even more extraordinary than she had thought, as he even beat the dungeon alone. She inquired if that was why she was traveling around with him to repay him, and she was astonished as Elaine even started using artifacts. She blushed and affirmed, which startled her, and she wondered if she liked him, but she refused. The protagonist's attention was diverted to them as he heard their laughing sound coming from the room. She laughed and wiped the tears and assured her that she was free to like whoever she wanted and was relieved that it was that human, but she was sure that Sid would surely freak out if he knew about it. She was so content to catch up with her after a long time finally, and inquired if she was going to stay there too long. She sighed as she didn't think so, although she was not sure where they were headed next. Miriade stood as she decided to leave and hoped that they would get to see each other again. She assured her that she could stop by to visit them in the forest whenever she liked. She came out of the room, which amazed him as this was a quick meeting, and he asked about her health. She assured him that Elena was doing well as she was almost back to normal by the time they were done talking. She was so pleased and remarked that he was the most reliable human that she knew, so she wanted him to promise her something. She wants him to make sure nothing bad happens to Eliana while she is repaying her debt to him. The protagonist sighed and clarified that she had never seen him anything from the beginning, so he wouldn't stop her if she wanted to leave. Myriad was dumbfounded as she didn't know how the two of them could ever work things out when he was so clueless, or maybe he was pretending not to know on purpose. She inquired where he was planning to go now, but he wasn't sure as he had not decided yet. He was so busy just trying to get there that his only plan was to heal Eliana and recover her mana. She was planning to stop him if he planned on going north because the situation there hadn't been good lately, and he wondered what was happening in the north. 2 days later, he thanked Bernard for taking them so far and requested him to take care of himself on his way back and greet Brian for them. Eliana wondered where they were doing now and if they were heading to another new dungeon. But he refused as he was done with dungeons, so this time he was going to Buddenbear. She inquired if Buddenbear meant the humans in our city and was concerned as they could get in serious trouble if anyone recognized them there. He knew about that, but they had to go there as there was someone very important in Buddenbear who was essential to his future plan. Meanwhile, in Buddenbear, a man with a scar on his face was staring at the wanted posture of Stetch Atelier with a reward on his head of 400 crown. He furiously slammed his dagger on the pamphlet and called him a cowardly traitor and wanted to find him at any cost. On the northern front, the soldiers were attacking the monster as they had to stop it before it breached the front lines. But their attacks weren't working at the monster, and it was roaring and progressing, so they assumed that bombarding wouldn't be enough. The monster punched them, but soon Prince Gerald appeared there and attacked the monster, due to which it mourned in pain. The prince praised them for their hard work and informed them that he would take charge from there on. Everyone was glad to see the third prince there and wondered what that last attack was and if he used the magic. The soldier asked if he hadn't seen this attack before but guessed that it was not that common, so he wouldn't have known about it. He pointed toward his sword and told him to watch it closely as this was the prince's combat artifact, which is also known as Goldmira. The monster was roaring at the prince, but he lifted his sword and struck it. With its single attack, it caused excruciating pain to the monster that grew loudly. Without giving it any chance to attack, he charged against it and attacked it, and soon defeated the monster. He was strangled to look at the shining object at its center and wondered if it was the core. He struck it with his sword, and his sword absorbed the core. All of the soldiers were glad that the monster was dead and prayed for the long life of the third prince. One of the soldiers was shocked and wondered if he just absorbed the monster's core. He had never heard of such an artifact. The soldiers praised the prince for his great work and rambled that if he could come by the barracks 10, they would prepare a drink for him. He was fine without it as he was going to rest for a bit, so instructed them to make sure that no one disturbs him. After some time at the outpost on the northern front, he was sitting on the stool and was panting and mourning because of the excruciating pain that he suffered after seeing the artifact. Meanwhile, in Buddenbear, they were heading toward their next destination, and she questioned if they really knew where they were heading. She looked at all the antique postures that were displayed and uttered that the longer they stayed there, the more likely it was that someone would recognize them. The protagonist assured her and tried to free her worries as his experience with the darker side of the world comes in very handy in big cities like this. He sparkled the light while standing at the edge of the port, and the man wondered if that was a light signal. She asked what he had done, so he instructed her to wait for a while as the man would be there soon. The man reached there and wondered who does he have there, but was stunned as he saw Stetch. He was surprised as he informed them that he would never set foot again in this city. The protagonist remarked that he still talks a lot, as always, and asked if he could give them a ride, or if he refused, he wondered if he could just take his boat. Ragface gets upset as that wastes the way to talk to someone whom he hasn't seen in a while, as it has already been 13 or 14 years. He was so sure that he would never return, so he wondered what brought Stetch back there again. The man started talking to Elena as he couldn't believe that a girl was traveling alongside him and inquired how that guy convinced her to travel with him. He wanted to know about the reason badly, but the protagonist was so pissed off that he warned him to use his fireballs as that was enough with his chatting, so he wanted him to be quiet. Otherwise, he would stick this fireball in his mouth. The man was amazed to find out that he had learned some new tricks and skills. Ragface grasped his hand and asked if he was expecting a big warm welcome, as he was a cold-hearted man who left them all that day. The protagonist asks him about Sky's location because he came to see him. He sighed as he had to look pretty hard for him. He uttered that everyone in this city was waiting for the day when he would finally be punished and thought he might be able to see Sky then. He apologized that since they were in Buttonbear, this kind of thing is going to happen a lot. She didn't care much about it as this wasn't the first time they had been in this kind of situation. He guessed so, but he was glad that she understood him. He could believe it had already been over 10 years, so the place had changed a lot. Eliana called him as she found something. While looking at the wanted pamphlet, she inquired if this was the person that he was looking for, as the name was the same on it. The protagonist looked at it and realized that she found the right person, but was speechless as the prize for catching Sky was 1-2 million. He wondered when did he get that scar on the right side of his face and what he had been doing since he had last seen him. She thought it was time that he told her about the guy and the reason that he needed to find him. He was a bit embarrassed to say it out loud, but she got pissed off and wanted to know this as she had been following him around cluelessly this whole time. Stetch rambled that he grew up in an orphanage back then and he would do anything for money, so he happened to meet him, Sky Jerkin. Since neither of them had a place to stay, they immediately became friends and started gathering up all the other outcasts in the area. They knew that if they wanted to survive in the streets of a city like this, they all needed to stick together. They all came from different places, but they all had the same goal, so the bond between them deepened. They wanted to ensure no one would ever look down on them again, which was their common goal, but they each had different ways of achieving it. Since he wanted to reach that goal through success, he saved up some money and applied to join a group of explorers heading for a dungeon. On the other hand, Sky wanted power to protect all those in need, so he constantly sought and developed ways of getting stronger. Then, one day, he said that he finally got what he wanted, and he showed him hundreds of pounds of gunpowder. While he was saving money to get out of this city, Sky was creating a massive bomb because he wanted to blow up the storehouses by the port. After that, he and Sky got into a big fight, and he left the city by himself, and he hadn't heard anything about him since then. He hated to admit it, but he knew Ragface was right. Whether Sky's idea was right or wrong, he wasn't there for him when he needed him the most. That was why the people there didn't like him. He sighed and decided to keep moving as there was no point in staying there. Later, the protagonist informed her that it was going to start to smell soon, so she covered her nose and inquired if he had been this way before. He uttered that a long time ago, he knew this spot pretty well, and it hadn't changed because the back street looked exactly the same as it used to. He guessed there was no reason for a place like this to change. She assumed that might be the place where he used to live. Stetch knew that Sky was very good with his hand since they looked everywhere for a safe place for the kids around there, but the whole city was full of rotten people. After covering a certain distance, he tapped on the wall, and a brick with some initials written on it was pushed. The wall opened, and a door appeared. This was the place Kai made for everyone. They went inside, and she wondered if there were real people there because she had heard something. They opened the door and entered the place where everyone was busy chattering, and everyone was shocked to see him. They were furious to see him back, and he assumed that old Ragface might be telling the truth. He waved at them as he saw them after a long time, but they got furious and commanded everyone to get him. The protagonist clarified that there was no need for this as he didn't need any special welcome. They all charged at him simultaneously, but with his single punch, that hard body was thrown back, and he was unable to breathe. All of them were shocked to witness this and wondered how he had knocked him so far with a single punch. The protagonist furiously instructed them to bring it on if that is how they are all going to behave. Using the enchantment, he punched another one. He also couldn't believe his strength as he was just a dungeon explorer before, so he wondered how he got so strong. Sky, who was working in the basement, got furious because of all those noises coming from above, so he went there. He scolded them as he clearly instructed them not to make noise while he was working and was surprised to see Stetch there. Sky Jerkin is the guy with a bounty of 1-2 million crowns on his head, but he had a very unfortunate past. He was born in the slum of the major southern city of Gridlock. His mother, Lash Jerkin, was so beautiful that it was hard to believe that she came from the slums. In spite of being poor, she always had a smile on her face until her life was ruined one day by a certain nobleman. The nobleman had everything that he wanted and was bred with his life, so as a way of escaping, he visited the slums to enjoy himself. That was where he found Lashes, and so Sky's life began with a nobleman's trip to the slums. Despite the poor environment, Sky spent 10 years in his mother's loving care, but the real tragedy in his life began when he turned 10. One day, when he returned home, he saw his mother lying on the floor, injured and taking her last breaths, and the last thing that she ever said to him was to run. Sky listened to his mother and began running, and he kept running without looking back. Not long after he left the slums, everyone in the area was slaughtered, but he only heard about it years later. So his lie began to revolve around the idea of revenge after he made some friends in the slums of Buttonbear, and they formed their gang. Through his resources in the underground world, he found out the person who sent the assassins that came after him and his mother was Duke Marcus Crossford Sky's biological father. After discovering that his son was living in the slums, the Duke took action to erase the shameful truth about his son. Sky was enraged by the inhuman and unjust behavior of the nobleman, and he became more extreme as time went on. Later, when he heard that Duke Crossford was going to visit Buttonbear, he devised a plan to assassinate him in an explosion, and that ultimately led to him and Stetch parting ways. The assassination attempt failed, and as a result, Sky's gang was suppressed by the authorities and severely restricted. He was surprised by the protagonist's sudden appearance after a long time, and his man wanted their boss not to stand there and do something. He wondered what they should do. Then another guy agreed with him as Stetch was a traitor, so they didn't want to let him get away. The protagonist clenched his teeth and thought he might want to play hardball. Sky agreed as he made up his mind, retrieved his gun, and shot at his head, but he evaded the attack using the crosswind. Sky was shocked as he used a shotgun round so he couldn't dodge it, but he was amazed as he had learned some new tricks. The protagonist gets furious, curses him, and inquires if this is how he greets someone he hasn't seen in years with a shot to the face. He loaded his gun again and uttered that he was glad to see him again. It brought back many memories, but it also irritated him. This was why he decided to shoot him first and then talk. So he instructed him to stay still this time because he would hold a welcome party for him once he had made a hole in him. Memento figured out this was not an ordinary gun, so he alerted him as it would do a lot more than putting a hole in his head. The protagonist mumbled what he had invented this time. He rushed up, cursed him, and approached to attack him. The man shouted and instructed everyone to protect their boss, Sky, because they might not know what that traitor Stetch might do, so they had to stop. Before he can take action against him, he gets attacked by Eliana's arrow and thrown back. She aimed another arrow at them and warned them to stay still and not to move a single inch, otherwise she would kill them. They get furious and wonder about who she is, but still decide to ignore her and focus on their plan. The protagonist clapped and used Ice Wave, and Sky didn't understand what he was up to, so he lifted his shotgun again and shot. But he again evaded his attack, which made him furious as it was really hard to get a hit on him. He was shocked as he saw his foot getting frozen, which made it hard for him to move, and he wondered when he learned to do that. He was so busy trying to free his feet that he didn't even notice that Stetch came down and got punched by him. The shotgun fell on the ground, and he knelt. Stetch pointed his sword at him and instructed him to give up as he had never beaten him with brute strength before, and he would never be able to achieve it. Sky inquired if that was all he had to say, if it wasn't enough that he almost killed him 14 years ago, and if that was why he came back to finish him off. If that was why he was here, then he should quit his yammering and get it over with. The protagonist wondered what he was talking about, as that wasn't the reason that he was there. He retrieved his sword and uttered that he had come back to help him achieve his goal, so he should calm down and listen to him. Sky was shocked to know that and questioned if he wanted to bomb something again. He refused as that wasn't the case, and he was going to kill the prince, which left him speechless, and he assumed he might be kidding. Everyone was shocked as he wasn't like this before, and assumed that he might have lost some sense since they last saw him. Sky wondered if he was hearing things, or if he finally lost his mind that he was suggesting this. The protagonist moved his hand toward him to help him stand and uttered that it sounded strange coming from him that he had lost his mind. He assumed he might be serious about this, so he grabbed his hand and decided to hear what he had to say. The protagonist explained that Gerald Messer, who is the third prince, started this whole mess. First, he forced him to act as his dungeon guide, then he took advantage of him and almost killed him. Sky grabbed his head and sighed as he wasn't that quick and wasted the last 10 years, and now he finally understood how he felt. He assumed that he and that first had been going around trying to achieve what was just the two of them, and wondered what he was thinking. The protagonist wanted to get an answer from him about whether he would help him or not. Sky started playing with his hair and inquired what he needed. The protagonist uttered that he required his ability and his whole crew, which surprised Sky, and he wondered if he was really shameless or just gutsy. He asked what his plan was if he said that he very graciously agreed to help him. He understands that he wants revenge, but that kind of opportunity doesn't just come out of nowhere. The protagonist uttered as he might know about Gambini Fortress on the western end of the northern front. He and Sky were going to team up to take over that fortress, which shocked Sky. He remarked that he had never heard anything so ridiculous in his life and was speechless. He knew there was something off about him and assumed he should have knocked some sense into him earlier. The protagonist was furious at him and called him a jerk because he thought he was talking bullshit because he had never felt so sure about anything in his lifespan, so how he could speak like that. Sky knew that it was a perfect fortress with its natural vantage point at the top of a high cliff. There was only one entrance, and there was even a dungeon under the fortress, so its defenses were stronger than anywhere else. So he wondered how exactly he proposed that they could take over the place like that. The protagonists devised that they would disguise themselves as a supply caravan and walk right through the front gate. This was a silly idea as they don't just let random street vendors to Gambini, and even if they somehow managed to get everyone there into the fortress, they would be surrounded. The protagonist uttered that an elf that he knew recently saw some sig for the dungeon in Northern, and she gave him a good tip. Sky was amazed to know that he talked to elves too. He explained that she said a wave of monsters was going to swarm the dungeon near Gambini soon. This means they will put a team together to clear the dungeon so they won't have as many troops at their disposal. That's when they will break in. Besides, they wouldn't turn down supplies, so they should have any trouble getting in. Sky can't understand how he is so confident about it, which Stetch clarified that he recently raided a whole supply caravan that was heading north. They would probably get pretty hungry in Gambini, so this is the best chance to attack. Sky was shocked to know that he was the one who cut off all their supply and inquired about his next move after taking over the fortress. The protagonist was amazed as the news spread quickly, and he explained his plan to him. Because the Gerald's troop were the only ones stationed near the fortress and the most capable of beating the dungeon. If they use the dungeon as bait to lure them away, they will gladly jump at the chance to eat it, but Sky thought they couldn't rule out the possibility that he might run away. The protagonist rambled that when that prince would see his face, he wouldn't go anywhere. Sky noticed his ring and wondered what he was. Seeing how confident he was, they assumed that he must know something about it. Otherwise, he would be the first one to run away. Sky agreed and put his and crew's lives in his hands and would do anything for him as long as they got the chance to stick it to the Rotten Kingdom. Everyone was glad as they were finally going to get back at them, and because Sky says it's possible, they assumed that they had a chance. The protagonist was glad as that was an encouraging reaction and was amazed as they really trusted him as their leader. After they were done discussing the matter, he instructed them to get to their positions. As they got to the caravan, he ordered them to get the food and supplies and gather everything that they could. The protagonist inquired when they could leave, but Sky didn't want him to be impatient as they couldn't go now. He wondered if he knew he was the lord around there. It was Idril Henrietta, who was the first prince touted aide. He knew that she would notice right away that many resources suddenly moved around there in Buddenbear. Besides, they don't want people to see a whole caravan driving around during the day. so they will have to wait at least until the next night to leave. He wore his jacket, so Stetch wondered if he was going somewhere. Sky uttered that he was heading to his workshop. He has a ton of high-quality explosives that could be very useful with just a bit of tweaking. He might as well use them now because he doesn't want to let it go to waste. He wanted to know about one more thing, and he took out his sword as he had been wanting to take a closer look at it since he first saw it and wondered if it did the explosives into it. He found his sword very interesting as he never would have thought to combine it with gunpowder like this and inquired who made it. The protagonist uttered that a dwarf named Clyde made it and was sure he wouldn't have known him. Sky was astonished as he knew dwarves too. He took his sword and rushed away, which shocked him, and he wondered what he was doing. Sky requested him to wait for a minute as he was sure that he would like it. Stetch threatened to kill him if he broke his sword. He affirmed but requested him to be quiet. Otherwise, something might happen to his sword. The protagonist wonders what he should do because this makes him feel like he is the only one without anything to do. Elena arrived, which stunned Stetch as he thought he might be going for a walk. Still, she was back early and inquired if anyone bothered him. She didn't want him to worry about her. Still, she wanted to know when he first got that idea, as he again didn't tell her. She was wondering what Myriad said to him that made him want to come to Buttonbear. But she didn't think he tried to attack a whole fortress as she heard from some guys outside. Stetch clarified that he didn't have a choice without Sky's help, so his whole plan to take over the fortress would have failed anyway. He figured it was better to keep quiet about it until it was certain and realized now that he should have told him sooner. She wondered if his plan succeeds and he settles things with the prince once and for all, does that mean it will be over after that?